Welcome to the Big Screen Symposium podcast. The Big Screen Symposium was held in Auckland at the Victory Events Centre on the 5th and 6th of April 2024. Jonathon Dutton presents findings from the Screen Australia funded report Breaking Down the Barriers to Job Sharing. This involved piloting a job sharing initiative on a Matchbox Pictures production in Sydney. Following Jonathon's presentation, Screen Guild's Executive Director Kelly Lucas facilitates a discussion with the audience on how the New Zealand screen industry can successfully implement job sharing.
Kia ora tātou, everyone. Thank you so much for coming along to this session. Most of you will probably heard by now I'm seriously passionate about culture change in our industry and how we can do things a little bit differently. In our professional respect program that ScreenSafe runs, we have a little word that we sort of say, we put a line in the sand of the way things used to be and how can we shift it to the way we would like them to be and what's healthy for everybody. So thank you so much, Jonathon, for coming. Screenwell is an amazing organisation that's based out of Australia. I've been talking with Ben for the last year and a half. Their work is just phenomenal. And as ScreenSafe expands, we want to be looking more and more and collaborating with Screenwell out of Australia as well. So I will hand this important information over to Jonathon and then we'll come back and answer your questions, take on some ideas. This is collaborative, and I think how maybe we could do this here in New Zealand and make it work for people.
Excellent. Thank you, Kelly. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us at 9 o'clock in the morning. Given there were networking drinks last night, that's very impressive. It's good to see you all. And thanks to Jamie and Jackie and the Big Screen Symposium team for bringing me over. It's wonderful to be talking to you about this fantastic initiative called Breaking Down the Barriers to Job Sharing, which was financed with the assistance of Screen Australia. So thank you, Screen Australia. So Screenwell, as Kelly mentioned, it's a social enterprise based in Australia, and we work with individuals, educators, businesses and industry to improve the mental health and wellbeing outcomes of the Australian screen industry. So you'll see that job sharing is very nicely aligned with this mission as we go through. This is the project team. So Ben Steele is the co-founder of, on the right, of Screenwell. But I want to draw your attention to, I've got a pointer, Rachel Rauch, who is a job sharing advocate, not necessarily by choice, but because she had to become one. Rachel was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome back in 2015 as she couldn't continue working the hours that the screen industry requires people to work. So she started job sharing, and I think she asked herself the question, why aren't we doing more of this? Like, why isn't job sharing more of a thing in Australia, given the benefits of it? So she became an advocate for job sharing. And she put job sharing on our radar, I might add. So what is job sharing? Well, maybe unsurprising, but it's when two people share one job. But there are a few nuances, you see. So you can do it in a few different ways. So division by time is the most obvious one. So you can split weeks, you can split days, you can alternate weeks or film in blocks. You can do a division by duties. So it can be based on workflow. It can be based on each partner's expertise. So junior, senior, for example. Or it can be a division by location. So one partner can work remotely and the other on location. This is less common, but it is a thing for certain roles. So why do we need job sharing? Well, this report from U&I Global, Demanding Dignity Behind the Scenes, it's called, and they found that screen workers regularly work more than 50 hours per week and often up to 60 to 80-hour weeks. This is a global problem. This is very much a thing in Australia, what this report details is the impacts. So the impacts of fatigue, the different challenges it creates in the workplace, but also how it can lead to burnout and various other issues. This is a report by the Australian Cinematographers Society in 2022, and it echoed DGI Global's findings by saying work-life balance policies must be implemented and include measures such as flexible working and job sharing. Raising Films Australia released a report called Honey, I Had the Kids, and they found that job sharing is a striking solution to assist in resolving the negative impacts and challenges experienced by parents and carers by opening up more professional roles to parents looking to return to work. And this last one, Disability and Screen Work in Australia found that more flexible working hours and hiring practices would allow more disabled workers to gain experience and pursue careers in the industry. So lots of reports talking to the value of job sharing. But there are also a number of benefits, which is perhaps unsurprising. So for screen workers, it can maintain good mental health, and it can help them avoid burnout, cultivate a better work-life balance, address health challenges and allow for rest breaks, provide time and flexibility to work on creative projects or on their own businesses. This is becoming more of a thing in 2024. Study and pursue higher education or opportunities to upskill and maintain caring responsibilities. But there are also benefits to employers, which perhaps the little lesser known benefits. So they can enable production teams to have access to their preferred crew, and this is really valued. It can provide two sets of experience, creativity, skills and contacts in the one role. It reduces psychosocial risks and hazards and impacts, mitigates the risks of fatigue and burnout, which is actually required by law, certainly in Australia. I'm sure it's the same in New Zealand. Job sharers can provide cover if the other job sharer becomes ill, not always, but certainly some of the time. And it's an opportunity for companies to bring their values to life. If they value diversity and inclusion, this is a way in which to do it, by making job sharing available. So job sharing contributes to a more sustainable, diverse and inclusive industry. It contributes to talent retention and attraction. And what we found is interesting, based on these reports, based on the benefits, job sharing is relatively unexplored, or it exists, but it's very ad hoc. So like I mentioned, Rachel is an example of how job sharing exists in Australia at the moment. There is a great deal to learn from overseas initiatives. So it's been trialled, it's been explored all over the world, but not in this part of the world. So that's what our initiative was all about. And we proposed four stages to Screen Australia, which was, the first was assess and propose. So looking at all of these different reports, all of the literature that exists around the world, to inform a pilot proposal for our production partner. Promote and recruit. So promote the pilot to assess the demand, because we wanted to know, is there a demand for job sharing at all? You know, is this actually something that people want to do? And obviously recruit job sharers for the pilot. Onboarding and check-ins. This was about supporting teams as they started in the production, because there are a few things to work through, and to help them get established during the production. And then to come back with a report and recommendation, which is all about encouraging the adoption of job sharing in Australia moving forward. So assess and propose was the first step, and we partnered with Matchbox Pictures on the pilot. Helen Pankhurst, the co-founder of Matchbox, and the head of production, was incredibly supportive of what we were doing. She introduced us to the producers, who are also really passionate about job sharing. And we identified a bunch of roles and departments within this particular production. It's unnamed because we're protecting confidentiality, but we had an accounts assistant, we had roles in the art department, multiple roles, an assistant editor role, camera operator, costume department, grips department, lighting department. There was a production secretary role, and there was roles in the unit department. So quite a lot of roles available. So we put them all out via an expression of interest. It was being shot in Sydney, so we made it available to everyone in Sydney. So what we were surprised by was we received 202 expressions of interest for this pilot program. So this is 202 people just in Sydney that were available at the time and wanted to job share. So for us, that really suggests that Oops, happened again. There is a real demand for job sharing, certainly in Sydney, but arguably across Australia. This was a quote. Love this. We should be doing more of this and find new ways to make our industry more family friendly instead of losing so many skilled workers when they have a family. Fantastic initiative. This is the identity of respondents. So we had a really diverse range of respondents, 51 respondents from the LGBTQIA+ community, 38 respondents from the identified as being culturally and linguistically diverse, 21 neurodiverse respondents, 10 people living with a disability. So a really diverse range of respondents. Gender breakdown, over half were female, 35% male, 25% non-binary, about 3.5% gender fluid, gender non-conforming, gender questioning. Then we had job roles and preferences. And this was, I might just stand up. This was actually quite interesting. So we had a really broad cross-section of interests in this. So we had 15 responses for an accounts assistant. We had 70 respondents from the art department, 55 for an assistant editor role, 69 camera operators were interested in this, 35 from the costume department, 27 from the lighting department, 20 from the grips department, and 38 from the unit department. So really across the board, there was interest in job sharing, which we found surprising. We were surprised by some of this. This was another quote. While I love my work, I suffer from anxiety and the long hours have a really significant impact on my mental health. I find after a job ends, I have to take a long time off to recover and to get myself back on track, and I worry about how sustainable that will be in the long term. This is very common. I can't tell you how many times we received messages like this. Motivations for job sharing. So a lot of people were interested in an upskilling opportunity. What we discovered through this pilot was that we feel that upskilling should be separate because there's a lot of initiatives, a lot of training and upskilling initiatives that exist in Australia and are funded. So given job sharing is new, we think it should be separated for the time being. So we had 115 people who wanted a better work-life balance. 105 people said that they were working on their own projects or their own businesses, their side hustles, perhaps. That's a lot of people. 37 people wanted to return to the workforce, 18 for personal health issues, 27 for caring responsibilities. Most people think job sharing is about parents wanting to be able to care for their children. We only had 27 respondents, like, look at this. And 26 wanted to allow time for study. We asked people what type of job shares are you interested in. Most people were open to all of them. Some were just really interested in the upskilling opportunity. Some specifically wanted a division by time, and some specifically wanted to work remotely. And we asked if job share partners, do you have a job share partner who you would like to apply with? 88% said no. 8.5% said maybe I know someone, and only 7 people said that they have a job share partner, which is interesting, and I'll get to why. This is another quote. I've worked in job share roles in the past. To be honest, I have found such roles to be an ideal employment situation. I felt in those roles my productivity was higher, and even though the job share partner wasn't technically supporting me in any real way, I felt like I had support in these roles. This is another really common thing that we heard. In terms of the barriers, so now we get to the part where we actually try to place job share roles on the production. And what was really interesting was most roles had already been filled well before pre-production. So what we found was that producers have conversations with HODs months before they get onto a production, but then HODs have conversations with their preferred crew. This was even news to the producers of this production, the extent to which this happens. So we go into pre-production or just before pre-production, there's a whole bunch of roles that are not contracted, but what we found was that the vast majority of them had been assigned to people. So that's a pretty interesting barrier that we were unaware of going into this. HODs were concerned about availability, so the availability of job sharers, like if they have to go and pick up kids, for example, they were concerned about that, and they were concerned about them meeting the demands of the job. This sort of indicated that there was some negative perceptions and stigmas associated with job sharing and job sharers. They had some practical concerns. So hiring 2 job sharers who had never worked together before, for example. How do we track the workload and ensure the continuity, the handover of information? This is the biggest one. Internationally, this is the most well-documented part of job sharing. How do you maintain the continuity of information? How do you hand over information in a way that no one forgets anything, etc. And creative continuity is a big one. And support systems not in place. So shared email addresses, shared phones, they weren't in place before we started this, so there were concerns that this would take too long to set up. Job sharers who were unknown to the production. So job sharers, if you're unknown to a production, it's very unlikely that you will get hired. That's embedded in the hiring practices of the industry. Concerns expressed about the suitability of candidates in some instances, and the producers were quite understandably not mindful of not imposing our pilot on the various different heads of department. They need to have autonomy, they need to have confidence in their teams, so they were mindful of not imposing teams on their candidates. Additional complicating factors were that Matchbox had several competing initiatives underway. So they had a sustainability program, they had attachment programs, and our pilot we discovered required more lead time, ultimately to break down the barriers that we identified. But I think undeniably the biggest insight was that HODs and crews are under enormous pressure going into production, and anything that compounds this will be met with resistance. And so as a result of that, our pilot only consisted of 1 job share team in a creative role. It was a 3-month shoot, and it actually originated from within the department. You'll see why I'm smiling in a minute. So it originated from within the department, so not from the 202 EOIs, because they were known to the production. We provided some support during onboarding, but they were known to the production. The first job sharer worked Monday to Wednesday. The second job sharer worked Thursday to Friday. We held regular check-ins with the job sharers, the HOD and the Department 2IC, who was responsible for sharing. So Department 2IC, second in charge. We had a pilot debrief with the producers and the pilot participants at the end of it. These are some quotes from the pilot. So the first job sharer, I have 3 kids and I found the industry to be unfriendly to parents. Job sharing is an amazing opportunity. I've been wanting to job share for a while now. Job sharer number 2 said, I liked having a bit of guaranteed work plus the opportunity for other work or to work on my own projects. It suits me to work this way. Department 2IC said, for the right people, I'd always say yes to job sharing. I want to do this for them. And the head of department said, without job sharing, they, referring to the job sharer number 1, would have to step aside from the industry and then be away for 10 years before they'd be able to return, by which point they'd probably have a new career, and they're very talented. Everybody loses. Again, very common story. So for the head of department, this was about crew retention. Key takeaways from the pilot. The biggest challenge to overcome is managing the handover and the creative continuity. We did have some success with this, which I'll get to. The HOD felt each role should be considered on its own merits, and we absolutely agree. Job sharing is not a one-size-fits-all. It is about having a tailored solution for each role. More time is needed during onboarding, which I've covered. A crossover period would have been hugely beneficial. So in the UK, the BFI funded an organisation called Share My Telejob to identify job sharers, place them, and they funded a crossover day. That just simply would never have worked in Australia. We had to find ways to do this without costing productions any money, because if job sharing costs productions money, it's not going to happen. It's not going to have a future. It's not going to be sustainable. The main draw card for HODs was access to talent and the additional creative mind. So this was a quote at the end from the head of department. Once I worked out how to get over the problem of creative continuity, I was reaping the benefits of it, and it was better for the production. It broadens the creative perspective of my team and makes it less one note. So in terms of the recommendations, the beauty of not having as many job share teams as we hoped was it enabled us to have more time to actually work out, well, how do we get around some of these barriers? How do we overcome them, and how do we come up with solutions to make job sharing more sustainable in Australia? So our recommendations for job sharers were, ideally they would be in a team already and they would be known to the production, because we know how important pre-existing relationships are. Job sharers, they need a plan to overcome the barriers and the practical concerns of production. So they actually need to be able to identify, they need to be able to work through those issues and present a plan to get through it. But that's all very well and good to make these recommendations, but how do they actually go and do it? So we started a partnership with Crew HQ, which is a crewing platform in Australia. And what Crew HQ does is they have this, people can sign up for free, crews around Australia, and then you can select open to job sharing on their platform. And what this means is, so say if you're a grip in Melbourne, you can search for other grips in Melbourne and you can connect with them. You can identify who they are. You can see what kind of experience they have. And then you can ask them if they want to actually be involved in job sharing. And we also were able to develop this job share plan. So this plan is essentially taking people through how to create a plan that will address all of the concerns of HODs. Because if crews have really solid plans, it addresses 95% of their concerns and they're far more likely to say yes. Recommendations for production is lead the way with job sharing by actively being open to it. So start having job sharing conversations early. Let people know that you're actually that you're open to it and you can do it. HODs and crews, if job share teams approach them with plans, support them with those plans, and be open to crossover periods. So crossover periods. So this is interesting in Australia. This is another thing we had some time to look at, which was a standard 10-hour day in Australia is made up of 8 ordinary hours and 3 hours of overtime, which means people in Australia get paid for an 11-hour day and they work a 10-hour day, which means that job sharers can do, on a crossover day, they can actually spend half an hour without costing the production any money, which can make a big difference to some of those creative conversations and so forth. I mean, I think that would have solved any issues in the pilot, for example. And we had some modelling done by Matchbox, which showed that there are a number of ways that productions can structure crossover periods that really would only impact or minimally impact budgets, which could come from various different pots of money associated with overtime. So recommendations for the industry was invest to increase the profile of job sharing, support best practice guidelines. So we're really conscious that we're asking job sharers to do a lot of work, which is identify and connect with each other and come up with a plan. So coming up with best practice guidelines for departments by bringing departments together to actually say, well, what are the big ticket items for our department and how do we help you get over them? This means that people will be coming to HODs and to departments with really solid plans. Support more job sharing initiatives during establishment, because the idea is it needs to be normalised. If we can support crossover periods, for example, it'll become more normalised. It will become more of an accepted way of working. The unions in Australia, we've recommended that they get together. So MEAA looks after the crews and the Screen Producers of Australia, so SPA, look after the producers. So they have shared agreements, so introducing, and we know that they're actually working on this, but including job sharing in those agreements to once again normalise it and make it easier for people to say yes. And that is breaking down the barriers to job sharing. The full report that was released, it was only released on Thursday actually. It's available on the Screenwell website. You can use that QR code. You can also download the job sharing plan.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. The stats in here, I think, are one of our key points of, obviously there's people in Australia wanting to do this. Thank goodness for a production to actually take it on board. I realised that the team actually came from the ground, which is interesting, and another thing that we could be thinking about, because I think when you're looking at your HOD teams, and as Jonathan was saying, a lot of them are engaged well before even everything starts rocking in pre-prod. So a lot of things to be thinking about, but I thought we will check to see if there's any questions. But as we were talking yesterday, how do we make this work in New Zealand? Is it a possibility that we could do this in New Zealand? I say yes. It's just finding a way. Let's walk down that yellow brick road. We were talking yesterday around the intimacy coordinators, similar 5 years ago. I used to go into a room and maybe 3 people would say, yeah, we know what intimacy coordinators are now. Well down the track, everybody in the room will know what an intimacy coordinator is. So this is the start of us opening up this conversation. Obviously, after this whole thing, if anybody's further interested in talking about how we further this conversation, I would love to continue that for New Zealand. But Jonathan, yeah, your thoughts around the main assumptions that were made by production sort of prior to going into this, and what were your thoughts around those assumptions? Because obviously the producers are going to go, the HODs are going to go, and, coming back to come over that, what are the main assumptions that were taken on board?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because there was a number of assumptions made that I think the data disproved a lot of them, So we had assumptions around, for example, the unit department, I thought was really interesting. The producer said no one would be interested in the unit department because we know that people want to work those long hours because they get the overtime penalties, which means that they're paid a lower amount. So that's actually how they earn their salaries. So yes, job sharing, whilst they notoriously do long hours, they would be they would be a good candidate for it. We don't think that they would choose to job share. And then we had 38 people say that we would love to job share in the unit department. So there was lots of little things like that you learn that I think what you discover is that there's quite a few blind spots that exist in the industry, I think, between just in various different little pockets.
Through. I was really surprised too when you look at those stats around the departments. When you're looking at, we've got the highest ones, obviously, were art department, completely understand that. Assistant editor, 27.5%. Camera ops, 34.5% of those teams. So costume department, 17.5%. The lighting department, 13.5%. Grip department, 10%. And then unit, 19%. So and obviously the accounts department, 7.5%. Yeah, these really surprised me. Art department didn't surprise me at all. Costume didn't surprise me at all. But some of these other areas that we hadn't really thought about, that this could really, really work. So there are a couple of questions, so I'll dive over to those. Clearly, job sharing championship needs to come more from the HODs, I agree. How do we as Kiwis open to job sharing more? How do we influence and insist that HODs to be seeking job sharers in the pre-production stage? Great question.
Well, sorry, what was the question?
It's around about coming back to the HODs.
Yeah.
And getting their engagement on board.
Yeah. Well, look, in many respects, the HODs are the gatekeepers, and I think it's filling them up with the positives. And the fact that it's actually not that hard, and the pre-production conversations are an important piece of the puzzle, because as we have taken you through. As soon as you get into pre-production and there's stress and there's pressure, and if anything, as we said, if anything compounds that, perceived or actual, they will have resistance. And so being able to, everything that we can do to make it really easy for them to say yes, that has to be the goal. And that very much informed most of the recommendations.
And it was interesting too, the actual team that actually came from the floor. You know, it was the costume department that actually within that HOD team, they were the ones that obviously came up with the idea of let's do the job sharing.
Yeah.
And that HOD wanted to retain that person, that experience and that talent. And I can tell you from where I'm sitting, unfortunately, we are losing, especially we've got the kind of mid-career who are now starting families, but we've also got the other ones who've been around for a while and kind of going, do I really want to be doing this anymore? And we really need both. So how do we retain this? And it's not just about women. You know, the burnout, especially in our art departments, our costume departments, well, across the board, burnout's huge in this industry. And people just want to say, I want work-life balance. And how do we make this happen? So I think coming back to the HODs, and if it's a Screen Industry Guild, you know, step in the right direction, or across all of our guilds under Screen Safe, you know, really looking at how we make it work and recognising these barriers, but how do we get over them? And maybe it does come from the teams themselves and how that can be an option that we can think about.
It's interesting on that. Younger generations as well, we found with some other work that we've done, there's a real shift in generational attitudes within the industry. I think traditionally older generations came up in the industry thinking that with a mindset of we work hard and we work long hours, and it's almost as if it was worn as a badge of honour, whereas younger generations aren't doing that. And that's a big reason why Screen Australia funded this initiative, because of the crew and skills shortages that exist. That's where this finance came from. This was a way to bring people back to the industry because of how many people are being lost for these reasons. I can't continue working these hours.
That's a really interesting point that they're actually seeing that from their side, because we are obviously going into, we came out of feast last year and came out of famine last year and we're going into feast again, and we are going to have trouble crewing up. And if we want to maintain this, and especially having internationals, but having an amazing domestic crew, we're going to have to think about how we do things a little bit differently. That's really interesting, though. I'm glad to be hearing that they're seeing that initiative. Yeah,
and I think the point about intimacy coordinators is interesting in the sense that 5 years ago when they were being established, there was a lot of questions about what does an intimacy coordinator do and how does this work? How does this integrate into the workflow? And now it would be very strange not to have one. We think that it should be the same with job sharing, and we think it can be the same with job sharing. In 5 years' time, this you would like to see that this would just be just a standard option. If you have a job share, if you're qualified to do the role, you have a job share partner and you've got a plan, there's no reason why you shouldn't be job sharing if that's what you want to do.
Let's hope so. We might be sitting here in 5 years going, look at this.
Let's hope so. It does happen. Change does happen. It's a bit slow in the screen industry, but it does happen.
It does. We have another question here. Job sharing has huge implications, especially for getting mums back into the workforce. But it is apparent that businesses are too hesitant to initiate it for fear of the unknown. Do you know of any training or upskilling initiatives for managers to learn how to incorporate this work style in the workplace?
The short answer is no, but we're working on it. And we are, and we're really thrilled to be here because we would love to be able to bring this work that we're doing in Australia and working with Kelly over to New Zealand. But one of the things that we are planning is essentially masterclasses in how this can work, how it can work for job sharers, masterclasses for HODs We won't take too much of their time. It'll be like an hour, we promise. But it's really just about showing them the benefits and how it can work, what are the sticking points, and how to navigate your way through them so that you can keep doing it. And it would be the same for production companies and producers. So, so it's really just about creating short workshops so that people are equipped to say yes. That's what we're looking at. We need more people like you who are willing to play with how it can be done. But what you're highlighting there is it's absolutely possible. And but it does require a little bit of effort initially to work out how we can make this best work for each role. And that's the big challenge that we see we need to overcome in this first phase. Yeah, well, I think it's all about awareness. It's about information.
100%, and I will be in touch if you don't mind, because this is exactly what we need. We need it to come actually from our HODs to say, I mean, what you've just talked about, Alex, is like more important than really anything, because they need to hear that it can be done, and they need to hear it from their peers. It's like everything. Okay, back to the... we're here. Thanks for sharing this. What's your view on job sharing for HOD roles? Are you aware of any productions that have tried that? And if so, what was their experience? So for the heads of department.
For the heads of the department themselves. Look, I think at this point in time, we found that there's no reason why key creative roles can't be job shared like any other role. There's absolutely more complexity. I guess the more HODs, I mean, cinematographers, key creative roles are the big ones. There are bigger challenges with sharing those jobs. But I think incrementally, there's no reason why we can't work out ways in which to achieve that as well. I certainly don't see why it's not possible. But again, it's about having really clear ideas of how you're actually going to do that. How are you going to maintain between the two of you the creative vision across the whole project, and how are you going to support people as a team? So there's a management element that also needs to be considered. So it's more complex, but it's absolutely possible.
In saying that, does the question become, how do people who are job sharing share the remuneration?
Oh, I didn't cover that, did I? No, so look, job sharers have to be able to take on a part-time salary, so it's a requirement. Again, from our perspective, we were how do we not cost productions money? Because we feel like if we cost productions money, job sharing won't be sustainable in the long term. So it's sharing a weekly rate. Sure,
and also you use some language there that is really apparent to me, and speaking with some colleagues who knew I was coming here today. The difference between job sharing and part-time, one inferring collaboration, one inferring finish the day or the week's work. There's a difference, and there's one with conversation and one that doesn't see the need for conversation, potentially.
Yeah.
I think that's a very big barrier. So the difference between job sharing, the definition of it, and part-time work. I think they both need defining with what they actually mean, because people will create their own definition and their critical thought around what those, I'm job sharing. Oh, so you only work part of the week. Job sharing doesn't necessarily mean you have to actually talk to someone else about the job you're doing. Whereas, part-time.
Yeah.
Job sharing does. And how to get people to take risks for collaboration. HODs particularly, to experience it means you understand it, means you will enable it.
I mean, what's interesting is that job sharers are defined as part-timers. They sign part-time agreements, and job sharing doesn't require any changes, certainly in Australia, to contracts. It's just you're a part-time employee.
Yeah, thanks, Erica. Because, it'd be a good thing while we're looking at it from the ground zero to how we, a lot comes through wording. It doesn't it? So, yeah, very much so. Okay, so yeah, I mean, HOD roles, obviously it does make it a bit easier if we add the less complex roles to have this on board. But across, hopefully, if they're the lower complex roles, people can switch in and out on the days. But wouldn't it be nice to be able to get there right through the board where we can actually support each other to make it happen for the higher end roles are where predominantly a lot of the burnout happens. So that's something that we do need to be thinking about going forward as well, because, the responsibility and the complexity of those roles means that those people need to be on the ground from early morning to late at night. So, yeah, it's finding more ways. And it's not putting the barriers in the bin. It's bringing the barriers up and saying, how can we work with this? How can we make it work? And the best thing about us and why we do our jobs, we say every day when we look at the script, how do we make this work? And I think that's where we're really key at doing this. And I think it's going to come from the ground to go, this is how we can, or this is how we can make this work, and we can learn from each other. So that's an important part of where we're going, because I think if it comes from the ground, then you're going to get more buy-in from everybody as well. And nobody needs more stress on top of the stress, as we know. Okay, particularly in post-production, very good point. Thank you. The longer hours are often not budgeted for, and the contractors work those hours to get the job across the line. How does job sharing work in this scenario? Has there been much talk around the post-production side?
Well, I mean, we did want to do a pilot. We did want to introduce post-production into the pilot. I mean, it's the same as, it kind of works the same as far as I'm concerned, as far as the on-set roles. Again, there are specifics for each phase, whether it's a division by time or it's a division by duties. I think post-production allows for a division by duties potentially. But it's the same way. I mean, is the question about the longer hours, the fact that people are working longer hours than they're contracted for?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Particularly with those longer hours, it's not budgeted for. And so when you're job sharing, yes, it was great to see the overlap and one person working an hour versus 3 hours. But when we're looking at someone's doing a 14-hour day to get it through, say, the final edit through to images and sound, how do you allow for someone who just has to get that through to earn a normal amount, as opposed to splitting that between two people who also still have to get that job if they doesn't matter how many extra hours because it's not going to be paid?
Yeah. Well, that was one of the challenges, like when we said around HODs and departments being concerned about availability, because I think, what does happen is people do work longer hours than they're contracted for. So people don't get paid for the 60 to 80 hours that they work, despite being contracted for 50. So that, I mean, I see that as a separate problem. But I agree. And I think what we found was that was a lot of the hesitation, because they're like, well, I don't want to get a job sharer because they're probably going to be more rigid with their hours because they're job sharing, and they've specifically said, I'm only prepared to work 5 hours or 5.5 hours a day. So I would probably separate those two issues, but, very aware that that's a problem, and, it is what it is.
And that's something else, obviously, under the ScreenSafe umbrella, it's awareness. I mean, we know there are certain ways that we can't not work those hours, like, unfortunately. It's part of the nature of what we do. But at the same time, I think as we are building awareness, I think as Jonathon pointed out earlier about our younger people coming through, it's a different generation. So there will be the shifts coming and how that all works. So, but that's something I know. I mean, the long hours, just crazy. And there's certain days too where, you know that you've got to get that last shoot, or we've got to get things out and we've got deadlines. But it's just unfortunately comes down to a lot of that word called budget.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the challenges with HODs as well, going back to the question of can HODs share? Yes, of course they can, but there are more complicating factors with the fact that they do what they have to do to get the job done, So how that works in a job sharing context, if people do have specific restrictions, then that is a challenge that needs to be overcome. I've worked in the industry for 15 years predominantly as a director, and I can tell you now, the hours that I would do was far in excess of what I got paid for. And that was a regular feature. I mean, for me, that's one of the reasons why I don't direct anymore, because it's not sustainable when you have a young family.
Yeah. Another one, is Screenwell planning any more pilots? Also, are there any case studies from the Australia or the UK highlighting the positives of this cohort?
Yeah, there's another report that came out by the group that I mentioned that were funded by the BFI to place job sharers with the funded crossover day. So they released, I think they released their summary of that initiative in February, and they've got heaps of case studies. I think they've got about 5 different case studies, and they go into the detail of how people actually did it. So there's more and more information coming out to make it, I think, easier for people to understand how we can incorporate it and make it a thing.
I did want to add that I've actually had experience in a couple of different ways of doing job sharing. One on a big production as a job sharer myself, but also as a producer working with HODs on smaller domestic productions to do job sharing in flexible ways that worked for the specificity of that production. So I'd love to talk more with you about that as well. Yeah, because it is being done in New Zealand. It's just being done in very small spaces.
We will talk, because this is so important. You know, I unfortunately get way too many calls, people who just, on the edge, and they are going to be either leaving, they're going through a lot, and this is, I want people to be able to, really have a healthy, because once you love this industry, you don't get out of it. It grabs you. And we all want to do so well, and everybody doesn't want to let anybody down, This is what this is about. So if we can build this industry to have this, this care and these opportunities and these people to come back and stay, what's that going to do for us long term? We're going to keep going, and, we're going to be able to pass the baton. And I love that we've got our little one here because this is exactly why we want this, Amber? And this is why this is so important. And I love to hear a little Bubba in the background and our little guy down here as well. This is why we're here. We've got families, and they're the ones that take the toll. But the interesting stats around people want to upskill, they want to work-life balance, they want to work on their own projects and business, because we've got a lot of people who work below the line, but they also are aspiring producers, writers, directors. So they need to have a screen industry workers, life. And the return to workforce, obviously huge. Personal health issues, caring responsibilities, and then, time to allow to study. So this was fascinating, wasn't it, when we were looking at when those stats, when we were talking about this.
Yeah.
And you're one of them.
Yeah.
Back to directing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's not easy. It's
not easy.
Very difficult to, if you want to be a conscious parent, it's very difficult in the industry.
I've done one thing sort of like this where I was just brought in to assist someone as the production was in the middle. So I was like a part-time assistant. And it was just going to be like 2 or 3 days a week for like 2 weeks. But then because the production was just needing more and more work, it just turned into like 2 months of full-time work.
Yeah.
And I had plans of like the things because I'm a writer, had other things. I'm like, okay, it's really hard to look at a producer who's like, oh, I need help. And to say, no, sorry, I value my days more than that. And like, no, I don't need money, because I do need money. So my only concern, like I would love to do that, but I guess the job sharing is maybe the protection.
It is.
That you have the other person
Yep.
That I'm not responsible for the whole week, so I don't know. But that's my one experience with it.
Thank you
Yeah.
for sharing that, though.
It's a really good
Yeah,
point. And
it's
I
a
do
really
think,
good point.
that also speaks to what you're saying about part-time and the differences between the two, because the job sharing does buffer from part-time, because I don't think what you're describing there is an isolated experience. I'm fairly sure you're not the only part-timer that's been doing 70-hour weeks.
But it is a really good point. And like you're saying, maybe that job sharing, having the other person, that's where that balance can come in.
In the research that you've done, Screenwell's done, are there companies of certain size or productions of certain size and scale that this things like job sharing works better than single, smaller documentaries or feature films or that kind of stuff? Is there any kind of evidence in your research in that space?
No. And I don't. I mean, I think it can work with productions on any size. I mean, arguably bigger productions have more resources to navigate it. But they also, at the same time, just because you've got a HR department like Matchbox doesn't necessarily make it easier, because HR departments have their own requirements and their own concerns about how things are working. So, yeah. Look, I think at the end of the day, it works. It can work across the board. It really comes down to the willingness of the departments and the willingness of the producers to say, I'm prepared to find a way to make this work for you for the reasons that we've been through. But yeah, definitely not a size.
Can I just ask a quick question on the productions, right? So job sharing 5.5 hours. But what happens, for instance, you job share 5.5 and then you're on the production set like that, it goes out for 2 to 3 hours a day. Then what the person who gets a second section, they obviously do bulk the hours at 1.5. Do they now go at some overtime because their job shares at 5.5?
So when you're contracted as a job sharer, you contracted it up front for a certain period of time. So it'd be 5.5 hours or 5 hours a day, whatever it is. Anything that you do over that would be considered overtime. Let me clarify, in Australia.
Unfortunately, I'm 35 seconds over and I know that Jamie's hovering over me. I would love to bring maybe some of this team here together and have a chat, because I think this is really, really important. So thank you so much, Jonathon, for bringing this here, and a shout out for Screenwell and the work that you and Ben are doing as well, because watch this space with ScreenSafe, and we will be putting out a mental wellbeing survey in the next couple of months, and I've added this question about job sharing into that, so we can get our own stats. So thank you everybody for attending.
Thanks everyone.
Appreciate it.
The Big Screen Symposium 2024 was presented by Script to Screen. We gratefully thank our event partners, the New Zealand Film Commission, Images and Sound, New Zealand On Air and Te Mangai Paho. Voiceover is by Jamie Irvine and the music is by Poddington Bear. You can read more about these speakers at our website, www.bigscreensymposium.com. This podcast is brought to you thanks to generous support from Images and Sound.